Today we're going to be talking about glandular epithelium, and the goal of this video is to help you understand the structure, classification, and functions of glandular epithelial tissues, including the endocrine and exocrine glands. So you may notice in the name itself, glandular epithelium, it sounds like we're talking about glands. So what is glandular epithelium? A gland is made of a group of cells that secrete a fluid substance. Glands are going to be classified in a couple of ways. The first is they're based on their complexity. So in these two images, the top image is more simple and the bottom image is a bit more complex. There, in the top image, there's only one tube here, but in this bottom image, there's more than one tube. Besides complexity, glands are also classified based on the substances, based on how substances are secreted. They can be secreted in through exocrine glands or endocrine glands, and I'll say more about that difference in a moment. But again, complexity, when I'm saying that, I'm talking about the number of tubes here. All right, how do exocrine and endocrine glands differ? So the name can give you a bit of an idea. An exocrine gland, when you hear that, think exit. So these glands are going to secrete substances outward, like to the surface, through a duct. And a duct is just a little tube-like passage that this substance is going to travel through. So an example of an exocrine gland would be a sweat gland. Now, endocrine glands are ductless glands, so they don't have that. They don't have a tube that leads to the surface, and endocrine glands are going to secrete hormones through the bloodstream. So an example of an endocrine gland would be your thyroid gland, which is in your neck. It's just below where the Adam's apple is on men, and it sits in front of the windpipe. That's where your thyroid gland is at. So that would be an example of an endocrine gland. And like I mentioned, the names can give you somewhat of an idea. So the substance that's being secreted, if it's an exocrine gland, it is going to travel out of the cell and toward the surface. And then if it's an endocrine gland, it's going to stay within the body. All right, now, what are the types of exocrine glands? There are going to be three types that we discuss. The first one is a merocrine gland. So merocrine glands are made up of cells that excrete substances through exocytosis. And what is exocytosis? I wanted to give you I'll skip ahead here and go back. I wanted to give you a quick visual. So exocytosis, there are going to be substances, that's the little orange dots, that are inside the cells, and those substances need to travel outward. Well, a little bubble forms called a vesicle that contains that substance in it, and that vesicle is going to connect with the membrane of the cell and pass through it without bursting the cell. So you can see the cell looks the same at the end of this process as it did at the beginning, at least the outer membrane. No damage was done to the cell in this process. So this is how the substances from inside the cell are moved outside the cell, and this process is called exocytosis. Okay, so now let me go back. Now that you know what exocytosis is, we said merocrine glands are cells that excrete substances through that process of exocytosis. And when a mero just means part, and the idea is the part of the cell, these substances are moved outward. All right, now, this image wasn't as good, I think, as the image I showed you a moment ago because you're not seeing the vesicle, the little bubble that contains the substances here, but you get the idea. This is what the cell looks like at the beginning. This is what the cell looks like at the end, and you can see no damage was done to the cell in the process. So this is a mirocline. This is an example of a mirocline gland. And a specific example of a mirocline gland in your body would be your sweat glands. So when you sweat, the cells are secreting that sweat, but no damage is being done to those cells in the process. All right, so I showed you what exocytosis looks like. Now, talking about types of exocrine glands here. The first was a merocrine gland. The second is an apocrine gland. And an apocrine gland, uh, it also secretes substances, but to do that, it pinches off part of the cell. And that's what apo means. It means like the tip of the cell or like a tiny portion of the cell. So here's an image to kind of help you see what's going on. We have some substances inside the cell. The cell's going to start to pinch together until it completely closes off. And those substances are now in that little sac that was pinched off. And a specific example of an apocrine gland in the body would be the mammary glands, which would be on a woman's breasts. All right. And then the third type of exocrine gland is a holocrine gland. Holocrine gland. It's a mouthful. And this one does damage to the cell. So it causes the cell to rupture, and then the products, the substances inside the cell just spill out. And that's why it gets its name. Hol means whole. So it's like the whole cell just pops and out comes the substances that were inside of it. Here's an image to kind of see what's going on. I took away the outer membrane to show you it pops, and then these substances can just spread out from there. A specific example of a holocrine gland in the body would be sebaceous or oil glands in the skin. And oil glands are important because they lubricate the skin so that it doesn't dry out and crack. All right. Now, I told you about exocrine glands, the three kinds. Let's finish up here with endocrine glands. So endocrine glands secrete hormones into the blood so that they can be delivered over longer distances throughout the body. Once you get those hormones into the blood, they can more easily spread to other parts of the body. And endocrine cells are packed tightly together with capillaries running through the glandular tissue. The capillaries are going to be where the blood is flowing. So these two are closely packed together, the endocrine cells and the capillaries. And so the cells just excrete their products, again, through exocytosis, like I showed you a minute ago. They'll just secrete those substances through exocytosis into the blood, and that's what you're seeing, these little dots in the blood. So these cells are undergoing exocytosis. Those substances get into the blood, and then they can spread from there. A specific example of an endocrine gland in your body would be the thyroid gland, like I mentioned previously, that's in your neck, but also the thymus, the adrenal glands, and the pancreas. Your pancreas secretes insulin, and insulin lowers your blood sugar. The insulin is secreted from the cells, gets into the capillaries, spreads, and takes glucose, sugar, out of your blood and back into cells. So that gives you an idea of how these things work. Okay, so to sum up, glandular tissue is a specialized type of epithelial tissue. Endocrine glands secrete hormones into the blood, while exocrine glands use tube-like ducts to secrete their products. And exocrine glands differ in the portion of the cell that is secreted with the product. We talked about merocrine, apocrine, and holocrine with respect to that.